No, sorry. Sorry, I was mixing things up. Because that's in the papers. That's in the papers. I think if I remember correctly, it was you told me 45 minutes, right? Or is it? DJ?
Okay, I'd like to welcome you all back to the International CSAN Conference paper sessions. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Ian McCurdy, who is a lecturer in music at the University of Maynooth in Ireland, and he teaches music technology and composition. And he's going to present on CSAN, the Swiss knife of music technology.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you all for coming. Special thank to Lewis for inviting me here to give this talk. I'm going to be a little indulgent in this talk and be talking a lot about myself, but I think sometimes that's what keynotes are very often about. So I hope it's still interesting and not just indulgent. And just hello to everybody on Skype or on YouTube as well. So what I wanted to do with this talk is primarily to reflect upon my own journey with C-Sound and to identify steps that have kind of been discoveries for me and propelled me forward in continuing to use C-Sound. How it serves as a tool, how it serves creativity, and also how it serves others as well, how it can serve other people using C-Sound. I'm going to use this metaphor of C-Sound as a Swiss Army knife, as some kind of a multi-purpose tool, just in a consideration of how successful it is in trying to do that, and perhaps how that can sometimes be a problem also. So I'll start. When I first started using C-Sound, I said something to myself. I kind of got it going, got a few sounds going, and I said to myself, well, I'll explore the capabilities of this thing. I'll see what it can do, but when I feel I've exhausted its potential, when it seems to kind of limit the things that I want to create, the things that I want to explore, I'll look elsewhere. I'll move on to another piece of software and use that as my primary focus, because we all have a sort of a primary piece of software that we use for most of our composing work. Well, I said to myself I was going to stop C-Sound at that point and then move on to something else. Well, I'm still here, and that was some time ago. So that's perhaps kind of testament to what I still discover and what I still need to explore within C-Sound. Even within the things that have existed for a long time, or within the things, each time you release of C-Sound is made, it's one of the first places I go to in the manual is what's new in this version. And there'll be a list of new opcodes and new features, and hopefully a list of bug repairs. And it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit like a Christmas Day, you know, seeing what presents there are for you. And we, as a non-developer, I think we have to be very grateful to the developers and the contributors for these things and these innovations. Okay, so this idea of a Swiss Army knife, you can see there that I've attached a few opcodes to a number of the blades there. So we're thinking about opcodes as blades of a multifunction tool. So we can kind of see a few essential generic items there, or the Linseg and our OSL, these things that have been there since the very beginning. Things that are personal favorites, so J-Spline is something I use over and over again. ZDF ladder filter, which is a contribution by Stephen Yee. Particle, that is an enormous granular synthesizer, contributed by Urban Franzek. This one here. Mincer is an interestingly titled contribution from Victor Lazzarini. So there's contributions from all sorts of directions and in all sorts of different styles. Some very plain functional, like the Linseg, some very complex, and ones that you would need a month to understand fully. So this perspective is very much my own. It reflects my needs as a composer, which are possibly quite particular and sometimes maybe not that general. I'll be looking at some quite unique applications of C-sound and the creation of music later on. Sometimes the individual tools or methods that I use are not actually that complex or cutting edge or fashionable even. So sometimes when I see papers presented of a kind of very new technique that's only kind of really possible to be run in real time in this day, I kind of feel like I ought to be using these tools. I ought to be investigating these other tools. But really, it is just a creative need that drives these things. So that's one of the things that I want to try and identify and explain why sometimes for me, it's even the simplest tools used in a particular way is sufficient for what I want to achieve creatively. And this kind of connects in a way, I thought, to another aspect of my practice, which is building physical objects. So from time to time, I build instruments or installations from wood and metal, or so from basic materials that generally interact with C-sound in some sort of a way. But in building these, I don't know if any of you kind of do a bit of carpentry or sculpture or any kind of manual creative craft work. Generally, people prefer hand tools to power tools. And the reason for that is that if it's something creative that needs to have a personal input, a kind of a more intimate and less buffered interface with the work is necessary. And I think that follows with the use of C-sound and also the way of using C-sound, or perhaps my way of using C-sound, that I want less of a buffer with the sound creation process and sound processing process. So perhaps that's why sometimes the simpler methods, the simpler tools are what I tend towards. And I'll be playing a few excerpts of pieces that I've written that'll hopefully illuminate and explain some of these points. And just as I said, demonstrate some of the tools that I've encountered along the way, some of the little discoveries that I've made. I'm sure we've all made similar journeys. Okay, so 1986, that's when C-sound first was released to the general public. I'll not kind of go into a long exposition about the history of C-sound, because that was covered with great expertise by Victor Lazzarini yesterday. But just if we kind of think about what we had in C-sound at that time, Victor was showing us what was available in the things that predated C-sound. So music 1, 2, 3, 4, music 11, music 360. And in the early versions, we really only had sine wave oscillators. Pretty quickly, we had additional options, and even in C-sound in 1986, we had some additional sound creation options. We still have oscill, we can create sine waves, but we can utilize different wave tables, function tables. The buzz opcode exists, so there's potential for subtractive synthesis there already. Our generic envelopes already exist, line, Lindsay, XOM, XSeg. You know, we have a much longer list of envelope generators now, but the essentials are all there. We even have a reverb, called reverb, which I guess nobody uses anymore because it sounds pretty gritty. Cone filters, all pass filters, so there's potential to build more complex reverbs even then. So perhaps C-sound is represented by the knife on the left there. It's just something which doesn't really have a lot of options, but the options it offers are simple and solid and reliable. If you think about other software options at that time, I wasn't involved in computer music at this time, so it's my experience is secondhand. But few things that people might have heard of, be familiar with: Cubase, run on Atari probably, kind of around about the late 80s, 1989. Band in a Box, sort of an auto accompaniment package, which I think possibly still exists even. But these things are essentially, they're a little bit trivial. Certainly Band in a Box to describe as quite trivial, and hopefully I'm not offending anyone here with that statement. And even Cubase is very much focused towards the creation of commercial music and not sound creation, because at that time it offers no synthesis within itself. So C-Sound is already a much more serious tool at this time. Other things, we have Sound Designer, which is our Sound Designer 2, which is the predecessor of Pro Tools. So it's a serious tool, but it has a very focused single function. It's not multifunction, and Pro Tools itself doesn't even arrive until 1991. So perhaps some of these other pieces of software, if they are a little bit trivial or represented by something which looks a little bit flashier, seems to offer a few more functions, but ultimately is a little bit plasticky and breakable, as in the knife that we see on the right there. So 1998, moving forward, is when I started using C-Sound, and it's expanded greatly at that stage. We'll listen to a few excerpts of pieces, and I'll explain the things that were hot and new at that time that I discovered and used. Just prior to this, my own experience in creating electronic music would have been with Akai samplers and endless amounts of floppy disks. I don't know if anybody ever experienced that, but that took a little bit of preparation. And a DX5, DX7 is a famous synthesizer from Yamaha for FM synthesis. In the college I was studying, we did DX5, which is kind of very similar. And that was about it. Various outboard processors, so real-time processing is kind of barely an option on cheaper computers at this stage. But we had the booth manual, so we could scour the manual and see what C-Sound offered me at that time. So the first piece that I wrote using C-Sound called Duologue. So the title is investigating dialogue and duologue between contrasting sounds and between synthesized sounds and real-world sounds. Just I should state, my background is essentially electroacoustic or acousmatic music, so my focus has generally been more on transformation of found sounds and recorded sounds, and less so on synthesis, even though I explore a lot of synthesis methods. I don't tend to use them quite as much. When we talk about synthesis, we mean synthesis from basic materials, from simple materials. But often synthesis still informs my work through observations or analysis of real-world sounds. And synthesis materials can then act and support transformed recorded sound. So I'll just explain the picture that we have there. It's a place near where I grew up. I grew up in Northern Ireland, so I maybe said Ireland at the beginning there, but strictly speaking, Northern Ireland, it's a different country. And it's a nice place, not too far from Belfast, where I was born, called Newcastle, and that's it there in the picture. And we have these, well, we call them mountains. Maybe if you're from Argentina and Patagonia, you wouldn't call these mountains, but we call them mountains, and they're very pretty. And there's a nice beach there as well. So I did some recordings on the beach. You can see the wet sand there, a few pebbles throughout the sand. I was quite interested in just this, the palette of sounds that could be got from that. And particularly I was interested in the idea of gesture and impulse and how forces in natural objects translate into a sense of force in sound that's produced. So an impulse might be kind of a step or kicking a stone or pushing a stone. And that initiates sound, obviously. But then resistance and damping within those materials imposes a decay on that physical movement, and also a physical decay in the sound that's produced. So even when I'm transforming sounds or creating sounds from scratch, I'm always thinking about these ideas of inputting energy, injecting energy into a system, and allowing it to decay. Essentially, just the sense of gesture, the capture of gesture. So, so we had this wet sand. I also kind of used a few of the pebbles as well, recorded them individually just as single impulses, like single percussion instruments. And I also went into the garden shed and found a few things there, spades and digging forks, and recorded them. But we'll look at a few of the processes that I was discovering this time in C sound. So granular synthesis was kind of limited in C sound at this stage. There was an opcode called Grain, well, there still is, by Paris Marges from 1997, which is kind of, it's more geared towards granular synthesis using single cycle waveforms. So I wasn't so excited by that stage. There's one called Granule, it was originally called Green V4, by a guy called Alan Lee, who actually, I think it's one of the only opcodes that was written in Belfast. So he was studying in Belfast at the time, and it's kind of like an oil tanker of granular synthesis. It can do fantastically large granular synthesis textures, but in terms of manipulating them, it's a little bit cumbersome. So wasn't quite so interested in that. There's this other one which is a little bit simpler, a little bit quirky, called Soundboard. I quite like the sound that it produced. It's kind of limited in some ways, but of course we know that limitations can push us in interesting directions sometimes. So the way it works, it doesn't even talk about grains and grain sizes that much. It talks about windows, but when it talks about windows, it's essentially referring to grains. So this is the confusing aspect of dealing with similar processes described by different authors. They'll use different terminology, so sometimes things can seem a little bit more complicated. But what it does, it doesn't allow us to create a granular stream with any silence in between the grains. So that's kind of a little bit limiting, but it's a quirk that we accept. So as you can see at the top there, we have a sequence of grains. There's no silence in between them. We can't really alter that